Thank you for joining us with another episode of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Each week, send in your questions and we'll explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. Joining us this week is Heritage Mississauga's Justine Lynn, who is the Collections and Resource Lead, and also Emily Owen, who was the Collections Assistant. I say was, I know you're at the end of your time with us here, but the Collections Assistant with Heritage Mississauga, as well as during the last academic year, did her internship placement here with us at Heritage Mississauga, focusing specifically on collections, but within that, a significant donation we had of Girl Guides memorabilia from the Girl Guides of Office from Mississauga. And so we're going to focus on the story of the Girl Guides collection and on Emily's experiences working with that collection and the new exhibit that is available at the Grange. And we'll highlight that as well. So thank you, Emily and Justine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So can you tell us about the overall collection? It was massive. I know that, and we're talking, it's not weeks worth of work, it's months and months worth of work to get to where we are. So can you just tell us, give us a brief kind of background on the collection itself? And Justine, I mean, jump on in here. You were here right when it got here.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit of the background and kind of the process that you've gone through.
Well, maybe I'll just say a bit about kind of before Emily started, was that the basically there was a Girl Guides office that of the White Oaks area, Girl Guides, that was located on Dundas, and when that closed down, much of their archives and their memorabilia, it came to us during COVID. And so then we had a volunteer go through a lot of this stuff and kind of just do a very quick inventory of it. And then that's basically when Emily came on. So I hadn't really even looked at it much myself, actually. Emily kind of very much became the expert on it. So I'm kind of interested to know even Emily's perspective about when she was given this major task. Basically. So yeah, so then kind of what were your first impressions when you kind of were given it all?
She didn't run away, so it's a good start.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a big task, and I knew I had a big task ahead of me. There were, I think, at least 20 boxes of things to go through. Some of them were archival in nature, paperwork, things like that. Other things were physical items. Some were newsletters. Some were uniforms, scarves, flags, things like that. Just anything you can think of that is related to the Girl Guides, and especially the Girl Guides in Mississauga, was in that. The collection was in the donation. And it was a lot to go through. I worked on the collection itself, like deciding what was going to be in the collection for about 6 months approximately, until I had to start the second portion of my assignment. I did my internship through the University of Toronto Mississauga's internship in history class, which was an incredible opportunity, and I'd recommend it to anyone that's thinking about taking the class. It's great. And a large part of the project was just doing the collections aspect. It was just deciding what was going to be kept for the collection. So for me, I decided about a few weeks in that I couldn't just pick and choose things because it looked cool or because I liked the artifact itself. I decided that I really needed to have some form of methodology and a way of thinking about what is valuable to the collection and what can be valuable to a collection and what will interest people as well as educate people at the same time. So I found I really became knowledgeable about what a collection should contain to be a good collection, to be well-rounded, and to be inclusive of all different types of not just objects and things to put on display, but research material, archival material. I also had to keep in mind that Heritage Mississauga is not an archival institution, so a lot of the paperwork that I thought might be valuable actually wasn't necessarily valuable to Heritage Mississauga as an institution, but to other institutions that have better archival storage or are meant to be an archive. Things like that. I really had to consider a wide variety of factors, and I ended up coming up with 10 different things that I needed to think of every time I decided what to do with a certain object, which at the end of the day took about 6 months. It was a long process. And even then, sometimes I felt as though I was taking too much or I wasn't taking enough. It was a really in-depth process, but it was made me really knowledgeable about what a collection should look like. And it was a really valuable and enriching experience for me.
I remember from my perspective, now, Justine, you have a different background than I do, but it was the first time I remember having those discussions with you, and it was the first time I'd really thought of something in that complex of a layered terms, if you will, or layered identity of, fitting into things. I've always been approached to, is there a story to tell? Is there, like, it's so much more nuanced and I guess structured when you're dealing with a mass donation like this, right? Like but almost to have a luxury though to go through this material too, because quite often we only get bits and pieces of things. Well, here we have, massive stories, if you will, that are burned. So I think you did an amazing job. I just know it took months and months, and every time I turned around, it looked like the boxes were breeding or something.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's also like a lot of also, I would say, like logistical concerns as well about like our storage space and things like that. So I think that Emily did a really good job about, thinking about like how you were saying, Matthew, the does it have a story to tell? Can we even house it? Do we have the proper facilities for that? Like there was so many things that we were thinking about. So I think that Emily did a really good job kind of making this very like rounded collection for us.
So one of the things I wanted to highlight, because there are things we took for the collection, but things we did not take. And when we do not take something, it doesn't mean it gets thrown out. So can you tell us a little bit about that process of finding homes for things?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and in this particular example, the donor, we worked very closely with them, and and they didn't want anything to go to waste either. And so I kind of set about trying, if it wasn't here where it found a home, where could it find a home? So the White Oaks area, just like to give a bit of a background, it included all of Peel and Halton, excluding Burlington. So a very, vast area. And so and also prior to its formation in 62, I believe it also did actually include like Hamilton and Burlington, like in some areas like that. So it even extended further. So because of that, we're finding some stuff that was from Burlington, that was from, Acton, from like all these different places. And so, we've been making a lot of good friends with other heritage organizations, museums, historical sites, etc. Around us, because obviously we have to think of our own mandate, which is we're serving the Mississauga residents, and our heritage and our history, but the other people, they're serving Burlington residents, they're serving Halton residents, Brampton, whichever it is. And so we had a really good time just contacting those organizations, those people that we knew, and going forward with that. And it wasn't anything where I personally was donating anything. It was then going to the donor and seeing if, hey, well, we made this connection, and then they can go forward separately on their own, and make those connections and partnerships. So yeah, no, but it was really good, and fortunate that we were able to do that, because honestly, like a lot of donors don't have that time or the resources to be able to like spend weeks contacting people and meeting with people and all this. So yeah, I was very happy to be able to help our donor with that as well.
Well, I know the amount of work you put into it, or at least I know of the amount of work, and just kudos to you for finding homes for things, because I think it's remarkable, the breadth of this collection in terms of just the geographic scope of it is quite something. So Emily, I know you've had multiple stages to this project in a way, where you've had the internship, which had a presentation and a paper involved with it, but really you're culminating kind of in something, an exhibit now. I mean that's not the culmination from what I guess the public audience will see, but I mean the culmination itself is a collection, I guess. But the exhibit that's ongoing now, kind of showcasing the work that you have done, but the stories that you tell through it. Can you tell us about the exhibit that's on display now at the Grange?
Yeah, so it started out actually in a virtual format for my internship with the University of Toronto, Mississauga. I needed a final product that was going to be able to show to my professor and show to my peers and my classmates. So I decided that I wanted to do an exhibit because there were so many artifacts in this collection that were so fascinating to look at. And I think visually they are really interesting to a public audience. And I wanted to kind of change gears from doing traditional academic papers to more of a public history project and engaging with the public. It's something I was kind of unfamiliar with, and I wanted to kind of branch out and start to do more work like that. So originally it was in a virtual format, and then what we decided to do this summer was put it on physical display. So sometimes instead of having certain pictures of certain artifacts, they're now physically on display. So there is some background and history about the artifacts, and then you actually get to physically see them, which I think is a really cool transition. The virtual exhibit was really great and I loved writing it, but I think it's really cool to see it now become a physical exhibit. There are some really interesting pieces that I'm really glad are showcased here at Heritage Mississauga for sure.
Well, I know the title of the exhibit is "The Girl Guides of Canada: Femininity and Community in Mississauga." What can you give us I don't know, a breadcrumb on the stories being told? Let's entice people to come and see it. So, can you tell us a little bit about the stories that are explored in the exhibit?
Yeah, so what we decided to do through the exhibit was focus on certain oral histories that were donated. They were tape recordings of oral histories done. We're unsure of why they were done, but essentially they just talked about certain women's experiences within the Girl Guides organization and how they benefited from it and what they kind of took away from a lifetime of experience. These were grown adults being interviewed. And what kind of came out of it was this fascinating narrative of community through the Girl Guides. Myself, I was completely unfamiliar with the Girl Guides prior to doing this project. My family members have been a part of the Girl Guides, but I personally have not been. So I hear their stories of being in the Girl Guides and they've all been really positive, but it's really interesting to see other perspectives of being a part of an organization, and a really unique organization of all women. And all of these stories being told through the exhibit and through their oral histories, their oral interviews, were just all really positive and constructive. They all seem to take away very similar conclusions that, you know, the Girl Guides help them become who they want to be, to take leadership roles in an organization and really stand up for themselves and represent themselves. One of the stories being told was of a woman who, when she was a kid, wanted a brownie pack in her area, and she advocated for it and advocated for it. And finally, someone opened up a brownie pack in her area. And it just goes to show you that organizations that empower young girls and young women, just women of all ages, really kind of have this community to them, and it's a really positive, can be a really positive thing for a lot of people. And I think throughout the virtual exhibit, we just wanted to highlight the positive impacts that this unique, you know, female organization has had on so many women and girls just all over Canada.
Well, I know just from personal experience, and not my own, but my daughter, being part of Girl Guides, right from Sparks to Brownies to Guides and now Pathfinders. It's been really incredible for her, to empowering, right? Like that idea of the confidence building and whatnot. But I would say a hat tip to them. And I know this isn't covered in the exhibit. I'm just reflecting on personal thing. It was one of the things that got her through COVID. You know, honestly, they did such an amazing job for a group of kids who are isolated, right? And so I think the organization speaks for itself in the way in which they empower and support young girls. So I think it's amazing. I love seeing the uniforms. There's something about seeing the uniforms to me that are nostalgic but fun. And so in the process, like I know you did, you know, again, months and months and months. You probably never want to talk about it again after this, but of the process you've been involved? Is there a story, an item, an artifact, a couple that come to mind that just you went, oh wow, or the story is so neat? Like, is there something that jumps into you?
There's a few things. The first one I think Justine and I kind of agree on is Marjorie Howard's commissioner's uniform. We actually got a full commissioner's uniform that once belonged to Marjorie Howard, and it was documented that it belonged to her and when it belonged to her. And I think that is just such an interesting artifact to have, not only because we have so much detail about who owned it, who wore it, when it was worn, what it was worn for, like what the uniform specifically was, but also that we now can put it on display and tell this person's story through just looking at a certain artifact. It's really, really beautiful and striking to look at. We have it up on a mannequin, so it looks very lifelike, like someone's wearing it. And we're able to kind of tell this really interesting story through a visual medium.
And Marjorie Howard was the second commissioner, I believe.
So.
Yeah. So she was the second commissioner of the White House. So after Hilda McKinley. So anyway, so these like kind of very keynote people in their history are all documented in the exhibit. So it's kind of the history of the Girl Guides through these people's eyes, which is honestly like a really interesting concept. I think like that's not necessarily something that I even thought of when we were talking about doing the exhibit, but when Emily was mentioning, I was like, oh yeah, we have to do this. Like this is really interesting. So it's very personal, right, as well, because the people, they have their own stories to tell and specific things that they remember and they kind of highlighted in their own memory. So it's very nice. Like it's not just a straight history, it's people's memories.
Is there any other stories or things that
I was gonna think of the toadstool, the brownie toadstool, and kind of how it connects to the founding story of the brownies, which I won't go into too much because it is like actually a story, and you can read it, and it goes all the way back to the founding of the brownies, but this toadstool, and there's also an owl, and they kind of have symbolism in this kind of founding story. And so they would use it to kind of gather around, like if you can imagine the little kids all in a little circle, and then the toadstool is in the center, and that's how they would do their meetings, basically. So that was one of those fun artifacts where when we first kind of came upon it in the box, you're like, what is this, right? Like what, like we were just like so confused. And then it was you, Matthew, you were like, oh yeah, no, that's a toadstool, right? Because like, yeah, because we didn't know, because we're not, that just wasn't our memory. But yeah, and then so it's really interesting to look at. You're like, what is this? But then it has this a much bigger meaning of like meeting and community. Another one that was interesting was the Bridget bear. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, it was a stuffed bear, and we really weren't sure what it was for, but it came with paperwork, and it basically just discussed how Bridget Bear was the bear's name, and it went around to different units, guide, brownie, I think any age, what it seemed like, and they would write a diary for Bridget Bear about what they did at the meeting and then send it off to another group, so they could all kind of have this shared story of what we did at the meeting, and then share it with girls of all ages and all different, walks of life. They could share this story, and we just thought it was a really nice story to tell, like a really nice artifact to put on display to show that the community doesn't, it's not limited to Mississauga. Like this bear went all around the White Oaks area. So, stories of girls were being told to a bunch of different people. And we just thought it was a really cool artifact to put on display to show that this community wasn't just Mississauga, or wasn't just your unit, but it was, all over the place. Yeah. Something else actually that stood out to me in the artifacts, one of my favorite things, I think, at the end of the day, was this Sparks shirt. The hot pink Sparks t-shirt that says, "I promise to share and be a friend." that is something that every person I've shown the exhibit has said, oh, I love that shirt, or oh, I used to have that shirt. And to me, that was just a really cool experience to have someone say, I remember that, and have them draw those memories for themselves, and to have them remember all these great things that they did in Sparks, even if it's just a small memory of like, oh, I remember wearing that, or oh, I remember going to meetings. For me, who, someone who's worked on this for a long time, I think that's like a really awesome feeling for me to know that it's something I put on an exhibit I worked on, resonated with someone and, had an impact on them. That was a really great thing for me.
But it very much speaks to like the values of, of the Girl Guides and what they were teaching and empowering, young children to do from a very early age. Like Sparks is, a very young age group, right? And so from the time they're little girls, they're taught to share and be a friend, right? And so I mean, so these are all things that we kind of discuss at more length in the exhibit. So
if I can add my 2 cents, I have a favorite of two, and it's the crazy hat with all the badges on it. I think that's just
talk about
something that is beyond Mississauga, but from this, that thing has traveled beyond.
And I think that kind of very much speaks to also like the Bridget Bear as well, where they would like, and the sense of community, right? Like, because as long as you were with the Girl Guides, you had a community wherever you went. And the Girl Guides, they would go, across the country, internationally as well. And, as long as you were a Girl Guide, it's like, okay, yeah, this is your friend, right? And so, very much that sense of community kind of came, like there's definitely some threads that were coming across when we were doing all this. And that kind of also helped us in a way like organize our thoughts about the exhibit and what goes where and things like that. So
and speaking of community, is there a community anywhere around us that has not come across Girl Guide cookies at some point? I mean, you talk about you've got a collection of history of Girl Guide cookie boxes, which I think is just, it's fascinating to see how in a way it's evolved, but it hasn't, right? Like you have these constants that become, I guess, staples of how the community interacts with an organization. And there's nothing wrong with the cookie. It brings a smile to somebody's face, right?
there you go. Yeah.
So with that, I was gonna say this is gonna sound ominous, but I don't mean it that way. Is there any last words?
No, I mean, not really on my end, but I do hope that people, they come and they see the exhibit. It's going to be up for the next year. So yeah, please do come, see all the hard work that Emily put into it. And and just enjoy it. And as Matthew said earlier, feel nostalgic and and have a smile. And we don't have any cookies, although Matthew, you did bring in Girl Guide cookies the other day to the office, but unfortunately we don't have any Girl Guide cookies. But please look at the Girl Guide cookie box.
Well, when the cookies come back out in the fall, we'll bring a box and we can sell it.
There you
go. So I mean, Emily, kudos and thank you. I know this isn't goodbye. It's a fond farewell, and we'll see where our paths lead, and hopefully back together. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, and Justine for the guidance in the project. I'm so glad it wasn't me, and the amazing material, and that sounds unromantic, but the amount of material, the amount of information, the stories that are told. I mean, the exhibit is capturing pieces of a much broader story, of a much broader breadth of collection that has come through Girl Guides. But you also see there are Girl Guide collections with the museums of Mississauga. There is material with the with PAMA and Brampton, and beyond. This material, some material has gone to Scarborough and Burlington, and I don't know where else it's gone, but I know it's further away than that. So so it's all over. Sorry, what was that?
I was just like, lots of places.
And then of course, the stories around the camps, and you talk about memories, but was it Camp Wyoka?
Yes.
What was their major camp? But keep sharing the stories too. I mean, help us tell this story. Write in with your memories. For anyone watching this program, pictures of things you remember. Help us collect and continue to collect those stories of community through the White Oaks area of the Girl Guides. So I guess with that, Emily, again, thank you and well done. Incredible to see the exhibit put together. It's awesome. It makes me smile. And
Yes, thank you. I want to say thank you to you two as well. Thank you, Justine and Matthew. I would not have been able to do this without you both, truly. It was definitely a really rewarding experience for me, and I'm very grateful to have been able to spend so much time at Heritage Mississauga and to be able to put on this exhibit and tell these stories. It's been an incredible experience.
And I guess as a final thank you, we should also give a shout out to Professor Petrakos at
Yes.
UPM for saying yes when we pitched this as an idea for the internship project. So thank you to the Historical Studies internship program and Professor Christopher Petrakos and for connecting us with Emily. And Emily, I guess, roundabout way coming to us as well because you found us first, right? And we were so happy things that come together, but I'm so glad it did, and truly a pleasure to work with you, and wishing you well on the paths ahead. And again, hopefully not a goodbye, and we'll see where the future leads us. But in the meantime, anyone listening to this program, come into the Grange, see the exhibit that Emily and Justine have put together, the Girl Guides of Canada, Femininity and Community in Mississauga. It is a wonderful look at a very important community organization in our city. Again, their location, the office for the Girl Guides has closed, but the Girl Guides are still around with us and still very much part of our community. And so we look forward to hosting groups at the Grange in the future again for their campfires and things like that. So it's, but again, highlighting their story is remarkable. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen to the program this week. Again, join us, I guess, about every other week now with Ask a Historian. Send in your questions to explore the stories of the city of Mississauga. We look forward to highlighting the history of our community with you each time that we run this program. And again, like, subscribe, and follow us. Stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And one last thank you to Justine and Emily again for joining us for this program. So thank you.
No problem.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.